This is absolutely disgusting what WWE did to Bianca Belair last night, and I am furious that we even have to talk about this. While Montez Ford was literally fighting for his life backstage after suffering a massive heart attack, WWE officials made the sickening decision to keep Bianca in the dark and force her to continue performing in front of thousands of fans who had no idea her world was crumbling behind the curtain. The footage I'm about to show you will make your blood boil. Bianca Belair, the EST of WWE, the woman who has carried this company on her shoulders for years, was put in the most impossible position imaginable. And when she finally found out what happened to her husband, her reaction was so raw, so heartbreaking, that it exposes everything wrong with how WWE treats their talent as human beings rather than performers. What you're about to see isn't just wrestling news, this is a wife discovering that the love of her life might not make it through the night. And it happened while she was entertaining you, the fans, completely unaware that her entire world was falling apart just yards away from where she was performing. Let me walk you through exactly what happened last night at the Toyota Center in Houston, because the timeline of this tragedy is going to make you absolutely sick to your stomach. At approximately 7:47 p.m. Central Time, just 23 minutes before SmackDown went live on television, Montez Ford collapsed in the backstage catering area while talking with several other WWE superstars. According to eyewitness reports from multiple sources who were present, Ford suddenly grabbed his chest, said he couldn't breathe, and dropped to the floor. The WWE medical team rushed to his aid immediately, but here's where this story becomes absolutely infuriating. WWE officials made the conscious decision not to tell Bianca Belair what had happened to her own husband. Think about that for a moment. Your spouse, your life partner, the person you've built your entire world around, is literally being rushed to the hospital with a potentially fatal heart attack, and your employer decides that their television show is more important than informing you about this life or death emergency. This isn't just unprofessional, it's inhuman. While paramedics were working frantically to stabilize Montez Ford and get him transported to Houston Methodist Hospital, Bianca Belair was in her dressing room, completely oblivious to the crisis, putting the finishing touches on her makeup for what was supposed to be a routine SmackDown appearance. She had no idea that in just a few hours, she would receive news that would change everything. The most sickening part, WWE officials specifically instructed multiple people backstage not to tell Bianca what had happened. They were more concerned about her television performance than her husband's life. Multiple sources have confirmed that at least 6 different WWE employees were told to keep quiet about Ford's condition until after Bianca's segment aired. What makes this situation even more heartbreaking is watching Bianca's performance from last night, knowing what we know now. She came out to that ring with her usual energy, her trademark confidence, and that beautiful smile that has made her one of the most beloved superstars in WWE. The crowd was electric, chanting, "EST. EST, EST," and Bianca was feeding off that energy like she always does. But as you watch that footage now, knowing that her husband was fighting for his life just backstage, it becomes almost unbearable to witness. Every smile, every high five with fans, every moment of joy she shared with the WWE Universe takes on a completely different meaning when you realize she had no idea her world was about to be shattered. Her match with Tiffany Stratton was actually incredible from a technical standpoint. Bianca was hitting her spots perfectly, the crowd was completely invested, and for 22 minutes, it looked like just another great SmackDown match. But knowing what was happening behind the scenes makes every moment feel like a cruel joke being played on someone who deserved so much better. The worst part is you can actually see the exact moment when someone from WWE management approached ringside and whispered something to a production assistant. That was at the 18-minute mark of her match, and if you watch closely, you can see the production assistant's face go pale. They knew. They all knew what was happening to Montez, but they let Bianca continue performing, completely unaware that her husband's life was hanging in the balance. After her victory, Bianca did her usual celebration, taking selfies with fans, throwing her hair around, being the incredible performer she's always been. She even did a brief backstage interview where she talked about how grateful she was for the fans' support and how excited she was about upcoming storylines. Watching that interview now, knowing what she was about to discover, is absolutely gut-wrenching. Here's where this story becomes almost too painful to tell, but you need to know exactly what happened because it exposes everything wrong with WWE's priorities. At approximately 10:23 p.m., nearly 3 hours after Montez Ford's heart attack, Bianca Belair was finally told what had happened to her husband. The person who delivered this devastating news wasn't Triple H, it wasn't Nick Khan, it wasn't any of the WWE executives who make millions of dollars a year. It was a low-level production assistant who was essentially forced to break the most devastating news imaginable to one of WWE's biggest stars because management didn't have the courage to do it themselves. Multiple sources who were present describe the scene as absolutely heartbreaking. Bianca was in the backstage area, still in her ring gear, talking with some of the other women's division wrestlers about match ideas for next week. She was laughing, she was happy, she was riding the high of another great performance when this production assistant approached her with tears already in his eyes. The exact words were, "Bianca, I'm so sorry, but there's been an emergency with Montez. He's at the hospital right now." Bianca's immediate reaction was confusion. She asked what kind of emergency, thinking maybe he had gotten injured during training or something minor. But when she was told that Montez had suffered a heart attack and was in critical condition, her entire world collapsed in that moment. Witnesses describe her reaction as the most gut-wrenching thing they've ever seen in professional wrestling. This strong, confident, powerful woman who has overcome every obstacle in her career just crumbled. She started shaking, she couldn't breathe, and the screams that came out of her mouth when the reality hit her were described as inhuman by people who were there. What happened next is going to make you absolutely furious, and it perfectly encapsulates everything that's wrong with WWE's corporate culture. Instead of immediately rushing Bianca to the hospital to be with her husband, WWE officials were more concerned about controlling the narrative and making sure this story didn't leak to the wrestling media. Bianca was immediately surrounded by WWE officials and medical personnel, not to comfort her or help her get to her husband, but to essentially contain the situation. Multiple sources report that she was told she needed to stay calm and think about the company before she could leave to be with Montez. Can you imagine being told that your company's reputation is more important than being with your dying husband? The first thing WWE did was confiscate cell phones from everyone who witnessed Bianca's breakdown. They were told that if any footage or photos of this moment leaked to social media or wrestling news outlets, there would be immediate termination and legal consequences. This isn't protecting someone's privacy, this is protecting WWE's image at the expense of human decency. Security was brought in to clear the backstage area, and Bianca was essentially held in a private room while WWE officials figured out their damage control strategy. She was begging to be taken to the hospital, but they kept telling her they needed to handle things properly first. Multiple sources describe her as being hysterical, desperate to get to her husband, while WWE executives were literally having meetings about how to manage the public relations aspect of this crisis. It took nearly 45 minutes from the time Bianca learned about Montez's condition until WWE finally allowed her to leave for the hospital. 45 minutes. Her husband was potentially dying, and they made her wait almost an hour while they figured out how to spin this tragedy to protect their precious brand image. The most disgusting part is that during this 45-minute delay, WWE officials were already working on crafting a statement that would minimize the severity of Montez's condition and emphasize that it happened outside of WWE programming, to avoid any liability issues. They were literally writing press releases while Bianca was having the worst night of her life. When Bianca finally arrived at Houston Methodist Hospital at 11:47 p.m., nearly 4 hours after her husband's heart attack, the situation was even worse than she had been told. Montez Ford was in the cardiac intensive care unit, sedated and on life support, with doctors unable to give any definitive prognosis about his chances of survival. The footage of Bianca entering that hospital is something that will haunt anyone who sees it. This woman who is always so put together, so strong, so in control, was completely devastated. She was still in her wrestling gear because WWE hadn't even given her time to change clothes. Her makeup was streaked down her face from crying, and she was visibly shaking as she tried to walk through the hospital corridors. But here's what makes this even more infuriating: WWE officials followed her to the hospital. Instead of giving this woman privacy to be with her husband during the most terrifying night of their lives, WWE had representatives there to manage the situation and make sure that hospital staff didn't talk to the media about Montez's condition. Hospital workers who witnessed Bianca's arrival described her as completely broken. She collapsed in the waiting room when doctors explained the severity of Montez's condition and the uncertainty about his recovery. Multiple cardiac specialists were brought in because the heart attack was so severe, and there were genuine concerns about permanent damage or worse. The most heartbreaking detail comes from a nurse who was working in the cardiac unit that night. She said that Bianca sat by Montez's bedside for hours, holding his hand and talking to him even though he was unconscious. She was telling him about her match, about how the crowd was chanting for him too, about all the plans they had made for the future. This nurse said she had never seen such raw, devastating love and fear in her entire career. But even during this most private, intimate moment, WWE officials were present, taking notes and making phone calls about crisis management. They turned a wife's vigil beside her dying husband's bed into a business meeting about protecting WWE's corporate interests. While Bianca was living through the worst nightmare imaginable at the hospital, WWE's social media team was busy crafting lies to cover up what had really happened. The official WWE statement, posted at 1:23 a.m., claimed that Montez Ford had experienced a mild cardiac episode and was resting comfortably at a Houston area hospital. Mild cardiac episode? Are you kidding me? The man was on life support. He had suffered a massive heart attack that required emergency intervention from multiple cardiac specialists, and WWE was calling it mild to minimize the impact on their stock price and upcoming television programming. But the lies didn't stop there. WWE's statement also claimed that Bianca had been immediately notified and was with her husband throughout the evening. This is completely false. She wasn't told for nearly 3 hours, and then WWE delayed her arrival at the hospital by almost another hour while they figured out their public relations strategy. The most insulting part of WWE's statement was the final paragraph, which emphasized that this incident occurred outside of WWE programming and facilities, and that WWE's comprehensive medical protocols were not applicable to this situation. They were literally covering their legal bases while this man was fighting for his life and his wife was falling apart. Social media immediately picked up on the inconsistencies in WWE's statement. Wrestling fans started asking questions about the timeline, about why Bianca's social media had gone completely silent, and why there were reports of ambulances at the Toyota Center that didn't match WWE's version of events. But WWE doubled down on their lies. They had their social media team flood Twitter and Instagram with generic thoughts and prayers posts while simultaneously working behind the scenes to suppress any media coverage that might contradict their official narrative. They even went as far as to contact several wrestling news websites and threaten legal action if they published any details that weren't in the official WWE statement. The most disgusting example of WWE's manipulation was when they posted a photo on Instagram showing Montez Ford's Street Profits merchandise with the caption, "Thinking of our Street Profits family tonight." They were literally trying to monetize this tragedy and drum up sympathy purchases while Montez was unconscious in the ICU. Word of what really happened began to leak out among WWE wrestlers and staff, and the reaction was one of absolute disgust and outrage. Multiple sources describe the backstage atmosphere as toxic and inhumane following WWE's handling of this crisis. Several top WWE superstars were so appalled by how Bianca was treated that they threatened to walk out if the company didn't change its approach. Roman Reigns, who has significant backstage influence, was reportedly furious when he learned that Bianca had been kept in the dark about her husband's condition for hours while she was expected to perform. Cody Rhodes, who has emerged as a locker room leader, called an impromptu meeting with several other main event stars to discuss how WWE's treatment of Bianca and Montez was unacceptable and a betrayal of basic human decency. Multiple sources confirm that there were serious discussions about staging some kind of protest or work stoppage to force WWE to change their policies regarding family emergencies. The women's division was particularly outraged because they all see Bianca as their leader and one of their closest friends. Rhea Ripley was reportedly so angry that she had to be physically restrained from confronting WWE management about their handling of the situation. Bayley and Sasha Banks were seen crying in the backstage area when they learned what had really happened. But it's not just WWE wrestlers who are outraged. Wrestling industry veterans from other promotions have been speaking out about WWE's handling of this crisis. Tony Khan from AEW tweeted that, "Family always comes first," and that, "No television show is worth putting someone through this kind of trauma." Impact Wrestling's Scott D'Amore released a statement saying that his company would never prioritize programming over the well-being of our talents' families. Even wrestling legends who normally stay out of backstage politics have been critical of WWE's actions. Mick Foley posted a lengthy Facebook message describing WWE's handling of this situation as heartless and everything wrong with corporate wrestling. Stone Cold Steve Austin, who rarely comments on current WWE issues, tweeted simply, "Family first. Always. No exceptions." The most damning criticism came from former WWE Dr. Chris Amon, who worked for the company for over a decade. He released a statement saying that WWE's delay in notifying Bianca about her husband's condition was medically and ethically inexcusable, and that no company policy should ever override basic human compassion. Let's talk about the medical reality of what Montez Ford is facing, because WWE's attempts to downplay the severity of his condition are not just misleading. They're dangerous misinformation that could affect how fans and other wrestlers understand the seriousness of cardiac events. According to cardiac specialists who have reviewed the available information about Montez's condition, what he experienced was not a mild cardiac episode, as WWE claimed, but a massive heart attack that could have been fatal without immediate medical intervention. The technical term is ST elevation myocardial infarction, or STEMI, which is the most serious type of heart attack. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a cardiologist at Houston Methodist who was not involved in Montez's care but has reviewed publicly available information, explained that this type of heart attack occurs when a major coronary artery is completely blocked, cutting off blood flow to a significant portion of the heart muscle. Without immediate treatment, the mortality rate for this type of heart attack can be as high as 30%. The fact that Montez required life support and was placed in the cardiac ICU indicates that his heart attack caused significant damage to his heart muscle and potentially affected his heart's ability to pump blood effectively. This is not something you recover from in a few days or weeks. This is a life-changing medical event that will require months of rehabilitation and could potentially end his wrestling career permanently. What makes WWE's lies even more dangerous is that they're sending the wrong message to other wrestlers and fans about the warning signs and severity of cardiac events. By calling this a mild episode, they're essentially telling people that heart attacks aren't that serious and don't require immediate medical attention. The truth is that Montez Ford is lucky to be alive. If the WWE medical team hadn't been present and able to start immediate CPR and use an automated external defibrillator, he very likely would have died in that catering area. The quick response of the medical team saved his life, but the fact remains that he suffered a massive, potentially fatal heart attack that will have long-term consequences for his health and career. Current reports from medical sources close to the situation indicate that Montez is now conscious and stable, but he's facing months of cardiac rehabilitation and an uncertain future regarding his ability to return to the physical demands of professional wrestling. This is not the minor health scare that WWE has portrayed it to be. Even as more details about this tragedy continue to emerge, WWE is doubling down on their cover-up and attempting to silence anyone who contradicts their official narrative. Multiple sources within WWE report that there have been company-wide meetings about information security, and protecting talent privacy, which is corporate speak for making sure nobody tells the truth about what really happened. WWE has reportedly hired a crisis management firm to monitor social media and wrestling news websites for any information that contradicts their official statement about Montez's condition. They're actively working to suppress the truth about how they treated Bianca and about the real severity of her husband's medical emergency. Several WWE employees have been called into meetings with human resources and legal representatives where they were reminded of their non-disclosure agreements and threatened with termination if they speak to the media about what they witnessed. This isn't protecting Bianca and Montez's privacy, this is protecting WWE from the public relations nightmare that would result if fans knew the full truth. The most disturbing aspect of WWE's cover-up is their attempt to rewrite history about Bianca's reaction in the timeline of events. They've been spreading an alternative narrative that claims Bianca was emotional but professional when she learned about Montez's condition and that she chose to finish her commitments before going to the hospital. This is absolutely false and insulting to anyone who witnessed what really happened. Bianca didn't choose to do anything. She was deliberately kept in the dark about her husband's condition and then essentially held captive by WWE officials who were more concerned about their television show than her family emergency. WWE has also been pressuring Houston Methodist Hospital to limit information about Montez's condition and treatment. They've cited privacy concerns, but multiple sources indicate that their real concern is preventing any medical information from becoming public that would contradict their mild cardiac episode narrative. The company has even gone as far as to suggest that wrestling news websites and social media accounts that report contrary information could be subject to legal action for spreading false information and violating talent privacy. This is a clear attempt to intimidate journalists and fans who are trying to tell the truth about this situation. Behind all of WWE's corporate machinations and public relations strategies, there's a human cost to this tragedy that extends far beyond one couple's medical emergency. What happened to Bianca and Montez Ford represents everything that's wrong with how WWE treats their talent as commodities rather than human beings with families, emotions, and lives outside of sports entertainment. Bianca Belair has given everything to WWE. She's been their most reliable performer, their most marketable star, and their most positive representative in media appearances and community events. She's worked through injuries, she's never complained about booking decisions, and she's always been the ultimate professional. And when she needed her employer to treat her with basic human decency during the worst crisis of her life, they failed her in the most spectacular and heartless way possible. The psychological trauma of what Bianca experienced goes far beyond just the fear and anxiety of her husband's medical emergency. She now has to live with the knowledge that while she was entertaining fans and making money for WWE, her husband was literally fighting for his life just yards away, and the people she trusted chose to keep her in the dark about it. Think about the guilt she must be feeling. While Montez was collapsed in the catering area, she was in the ring playing to the crowd and having fun with her performance. While paramedics were working to save his life, she was doing interviews about storylines and taking selfies with fans. None of this is her fault, but the emotional impact of learning that she was kept ignorant of her husband's crisis is going to haunt her for the rest of her life. The trust between Bianca and WWE has been shattered in a way that can never be repaired. How can she ever feel secure performing for a company that has proven they will prioritize their television programming over her most fundamental right to know when her spouse is in a life-threatening emergency? How can she ever trust WWE management again when they've demonstrated such callous disregard for her well-being as a human being? This incident has also created a climate of fear and uncertainty among other WWE wrestlers. If the company will treat one of their biggest stars this way during a family crisis, what will they do to wrestlers who have less leverage and fewer options? Multiple sources report that there have been discussions among WWE talent about negotiating family emergency clauses into their contracts to prevent this type of situation from happening again. What happened to Bianca Belair and Montez Ford is going to have far-reaching implications for the professional wrestling industry and how companies handle medical emergencies and family crises involving their talent. This incident has exposed fundamental problems with WWE's corporate culture and their treatment of wrestlers as human beings rather than just performers. The wrestling industry has a long history of putting the show above everything else, often at the expense of wrestler safety and well-being. The old-school mentality of, the show must go on, has led to countless instances of wrestlers performing through serious injuries, personal tragedies, and family emergencies because they were told that their professional obligations came first. But what happened to Bianca represents a new low in corporate callousness. This wasn't about a wrestler choosing to perform through personal adversity. This was about a company deliberately hiding a life-threatening emergency from someone whose husband was fighting for his life. This crosses every line of basic human decency and professional ethics. Other wrestling promotions are already using this incident as an example of why their approach to talent relations is superior to WWE's corporate model. AEW, Impact Wrestling, and several independent promotions have all issued statements emphasizing their commitment to treating wrestlers as human beings first and performers second. The incident has also raised questions about the legal and ethical obligations of employers when it comes to family medical emergencies. Several employment law experts have suggested that WWE's decision to withhold information about Montez's condition from Bianca could potentially violate workplace safety regulations and basic employment standards. Labor advocates in the wrestling industry are pointing to this incident as evidence of why wrestlers need union representation and stronger contractual protections for family emergencies. The fact that WWE could essentially hold one of their biggest stars captive during a family crisis while prioritizing their television programming shows how powerless individual wrestlers are against corporate interests. This incident is also likely to affect WWE's relationships with corporate sponsors and television partners who may not want to be associated with a company that treats their talent with such obvious disregard for basic human decency. Several sponsors have already privately expressed concerns about WWE's handling of this situation. Despite WWE's best efforts to control the narrative and suppress information about what really happened, the truth about their treatment of Bianca Belair is starting to emerge through multiple sources and eyewitness accounts. The company's attempts to cover up their callous behavior are beginning to backfire as more people come forward with details about that horrific night. Hospital workers who witnessed Bianca's arrival have begun speaking anonymously to wrestling news outlets, contradicting WWE's timeline and description of events. These medical professionals, who have no connection to the wrestling industry and no reason to lie, are describing a woman who was clearly traumatized and had obviously been kept unaware of her husband's condition for hours. Several WWE wrestlers have also begun subtly contradicting the company's official narrative through cryptic social media posts and carefully worded interviews. While they can't speak directly about what they witnessed due to their contracts and non-disclosure agreements, they're finding ways to show support for Bianca and indicate that WWE's version of events is not accurate. The most damaging leak came from security footage that apparently shows the exact timeline of events, contradicting several key elements of WWE's official statement. While this footage hasn't been released publicly, multiple sources have confirmed its existence and described it as devastating to WWE's credibility regarding their handling of this crisis. Wrestling journalists who initially reported WWE's official statement are now investigating the inconsistencies and contradictions in the company's narrative. Several major wrestling news websites have published follow-up articles questioning WWE's timeline and highlighting the discrepancies between official statements and eyewitness accounts. Even WWE's own social media activity has inadvertently contradicted their official narrative. Posts that were supposed to support their version of events have actually raised more questions about the timeline and about why certain information was withheld from the public and apparently from Bianca herself. The most significant development has been the emergence of audio recordings from backstage that night, which apparently capture conversations between WWE officials about keeping Bianca in the dark and managing the situation for television purposes. While these recordings haven't been released publicly, their existence has been confirmed by multiple sources and they apparently provide clear evidence of WWE's decision-making process during the crisis. What happened to Bianca Belair and Montez Ford is not just a wrestling story, it's a human story about how corporate greed and callousness can destroy lives and relationships. WWE's treatment of one of their biggest stars during the worst crisis of her life exposes everything that's wrong with their corporate culture and their view of wrestlers as commodities rather than human beings. This cannot be allowed to stand. WWE needs to be held accountable for their actions, not just by wrestling fans but by the broader public who should be outraged by this display of corporate cruelty. The company's attempts to cover up their behavior and control the narrative show that they have no intention of accepting responsibility or changing their policies to prevent this from happening again. As wrestling fans, we have the power to demand better from WWE. We can refuse to support a company that treats their talent with such obvious disregard for basic human decency. We can make our voices heard on social media, we can contact WWE's sponsors and television partners, and we can show our support for Bianca and Montez during this incredibly difficult time. But this story is bigger than just one incident or one couple's tragedy. This is about the fundamental question of how employers should treat their employees during family crises and medical emergencies. WWE's behavior sets a dangerous precedent that could affect workers in every industry if it's allowed to go unchallenged. Bianca Belair deserves better. Montez Ford deserves better. Every WWE wrestler deserves better. And until WWE acknowledges what they did wrong and takes concrete steps to ensure it never happens again, this story will continue to be a stain on their corporate reputation and a reminder of their capacity for heartless cruelty. The wrestling community needs to rally around Bianca and Montez during this difficult time, but we also need to make sure that WWE faces real consequences for their actions. This isn't about entertainment or storylines, this is about basic human decency and corporate accountability. Share this video, comment below with your thoughts, and let WWE know that their treatment of Bianca Belair during her family's medical crisis is absolutely unacceptable. The wrestling world is watching, and we will not let this be forgotten or covered up. If you thought tonight's story was wild, trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. So don't stop now. Click on the video right here on your screen to continue the chaos, the drama, and the inside scoop only we deliver. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join the WrestlingNewsCC family, where the real stories of WWE come to life. See you in the next one.